They say the most powerful healers are born from the deepest wounds, that the universe grants its greatest gifts to those it has broken most thoroughly. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes those gifts become chains, binding you to the very people who see you as nothing more than a disposable tool. And the cruelest irony of all, the moment you discover your worth is often the moment you realize you've already been sold. The morning Thalera discovered her curse had become a gift was the same morning her family decided she was finally worth something. Just not to them. She knelt in the herb garden behind their crumbling cottage, fingers deep in the dark soil, when the voices drifted through the broken shutters. Her mother, Velithra, spoke in hushed, urgent tones that made Thalera's shoulders tense instinctively. The royal messenger left clear instructions. Velithra said, "Every pack in the northern territories must send their best healer. The Alpha King is dying." "We have no healer," her father Droveth responded flatly. "Unless you count old Esmea's tinctures, and she's half-blind besides. We have Thalera." The silence that followed was so complete that even the morning birds seemed to pause their songs. Thalera's fingers stilled in the earth, dirt crumbling between her trembling hands. "Thalera is an Omega," Droveth said finally, his voice carrying the same tone he used when discussing rotted crops or diseased livestock. "Worse than that, she's touched. No wolf would claim her. No pack accepts her. She brings death to everything she touches." "Exactly," Velithra countered, and something in her voice made Thalera's blood run cold. "The notice says King Tharion's illness resists all traditional healing. Perhaps what he needs isn't traditional at all." Thalera pressed her back against the cottage wall, her heart hammering. They were discussing her like livestock at market, weighing her value against their desperation. She thought of all the times her mother had recoiled from her touch, all the careful distances her family maintained, as if her very presence might contaminate them. "The reward," Velithra continued, "is enough gold to rebuild our entire compound, to buy Carden a proper mate from the southern packs, to give Lysara the dowry she deserves." Her siblings. Of course, the ones with strong wolves, proper instincts, and futures that didn't involve being hidden away like a shameful secret. Thalera had learned long ago that love in their family was carefully rationed, and her portion had run dry the day she tried to heal that dying bird when she was 7. The bird had lived, thrived even, but her touch had left strange marks, dark veins that pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made even seasoned warriors step back in fear. "And if she fails?" Droveth asked. "The king's advisors won't take kindly to an Omega's touch on their alpha, especially one who's marked." "Then she doesn't come back," Velithra said simply. "Either way, our problem is solved." The words shouldn't have hurt. Thalera had heard variations of them her entire life, but pain bloomed in her chest anyway, sharp and familiar. Her healing gift had manifested wrong, twisted into something that saved lives but left traces of darkness wherever she touched. The village healers had examined her once and declared her corrupted. She touched the silver-white scars that traced up her forearms, following patterns that seemed almost like writing in a language she didn't know. They pulsed faintly when she channeled her gift, growing brighter with each use. The local healer had called them death marks, claiming they would eventually consume her. But Thalera knew better. They were life marks. She just didn't know whose life they were meant to save. The cottage door slammed open, making her jump. Droveth stood in the doorway, his weathered face set in hard lines. Behind him, Velithra clutched a worn traveling cloak. "Pack your things," he said without preamble. "You leave within the hour." "Father, I don't." He held up one hand, and she noticed he was careful to maintain his distance, as always. "The royal convoy will arrive soon. You'll go with them to the Crystal Palace." Thalera stood slowly, soil falling from her skirts. "To heal the Alpha King?" "To try," Velithra corrected, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. The notice was clear. King Tharion has been cursed by something ancient. Every healer who's attempted to break it has either failed or... She paused, seeming to reconsider her words. "Or what?" Thalera pressed. "Or been consumed by it," Droveth finished bluntly. "The curse fights back, they say. 3 healers are already dead, and twice that number have lost their minds." A bitter laugh escaped before Thalera could stop it. "So you're sending your cursed daughter to fight a curse? How fitting." "You're the only thing we have that might work," Velithra said, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Regret, perhaps, or maybe just disappointment that this was their only option. "Your affliction might be exactly what's needed. And if I refuse?" The temperature in the garden seemed to drop. Droveth's eyes flashed amber, his wolf rising to the surface. Even as a human, an alpha's dominance was absolute over an omega. "You won't," he said simply, "because despite everything, you're still Pack, and Pack serves." The words were carved into every wolf's soul from birth. But Thalera had never truly been Pack, had she? She was the shadow at the edge of gatherings, the whispered warning to cubs who misbehaved, the cautionary tale of what happened when the moon goddess's gifts went wrong. "What about Ismaya?" Thalera asked suddenly. "She practically raised me. Shouldn't she—" "She's the one who suggested it," Velithra cut in, and that betrayal hurt worst of all. "She said your marks have been calling for something, growing brighter each night, responding to something beyond our understanding. Maybe this is it." The sound of approaching hooves ended any further discussion. The royal convoy had arrived, 6 black carriages bearing the king's seal, a howling wolf beneath a crown of thorns. Guards in midnight blue armor flanked the procession, their faces hidden behind silver masks. The lead carriage door opened, and a man emerged who made everyone in the garden instinctively bow, not from respect, but from the sheer weight of power he radiated. This was Beta Commander Ravik, the king's second, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary. His eyes, an unsettling shade of violet, swept over the family before settling on Thalera. His nostrils flared slightly, scenting her, and his lips curled in what might have been disgust or interest. "The Omega," he said, not a question. "You're the one who carries death in her veins?" Thalera lifted her chin, finding courage in her anger. "I carry life, Beta Commander. It just happens to look like death to those who don't understand it." Ravik circled her slowly, like a predator studying prey. "Bold words for one so low-born. The king's curse has already claimed several who spoke with such confidence. Then perhaps the king's curse needs someone who has nothing left to lose," she replied. "Thalera!" Velithra hissed, but Ravik held up a hand, silencing her. "Interesting," he murmured. He produced a scroll from his coat, presenting it to Droveth. "The terms. If she succeeds, your family will be elevated to the king's personal service, with all the rewards that entails. If she fails, we understand, Droveth said quickly, pressing his thumb to the seal without reading it. The contract glowed briefly, magically binding. Ravik turned back to Thalera. Gather your things. 1 bag only. We leave immediately. She had little to pack. 2 spare dresses, a journal of healing herbs she'd compiled herself, a carved wooden wolf her brother had made her before he'd learned to fear her. The rest of her possessions weren't really hers at all, just borrowed space in a home that had never wanted her. As she emerged with her meager bag, she found Esmea waiting by the carriage. The elderly healer's clouded eyes seemed to see straight through her. Child, the old woman said softly, pressing something into Thalera's palm. It was a small vial filled with silvery liquid that seemed to move on its own. When you touch him, and you will touch him, remember that sometimes to heal is to claim, and to claim is to surrender. The old magic recognizes its own. Before Thalera could ask what she meant, Ravik's hand closed around her arm, guiding her firmly toward the carriage. She didn't look back at her family. There would be no tearful goodbyes, no promises to write. As the carriage pulled away, she heard her mother's voice one last time. Finally, the shame might be lifted. The words followed her into the dark interior of the carriage, where Beta Commander Ravik watched her with those unsettling violet eyes, making notes in his leather journal. Through the window, the familiar landscape of her village faded, replaced by the unknown path that led to the Crystal Palace, and to a fate that would transform not just her marks, but the very nature of what it meant to be Omega. The Crystal Palace rose from the mountain like a fever dream, its spires twisting into the clouds as if trying to pierce heaven itself. Thalera pressed her face to the carriage window, watching the structure grow larger with each turn of the wheels. Built from white stone that seemed to pulse with inner light, the palace should have been beautiful. Instead, it radiated wrongness, like a perfect smile hiding rotted teeth. Impressive, isn't it? Beta Commander Ravik commented from across the carriage. He'd been studying her for the entire 3-day journey, making notes in his leather journal. They say King Tharian's grandfather killed 1,000 enemies to claim this mountain. Their blood still feeds the roses in the lower gardens. Thalera pulled back from the window. Is that meant to frighten me? Merely to inform. He snapped the journal shut. You should understand what kind of power you're about to encounter. The Valdris line doesn't suffer fools or failures. The carriage lurched to a stop in a courtyard of black marble. Guards surrounded them immediately, their faces hidden behind those unnerving silver masks. Thalera was hustled out, her bag taken before she could protest, and marched through a side entrance she suspected was reserved for servants and other undesirables. The corridors they traveled were narrow and dim, lit by crystals that cast sickly green shadows. Other servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, averting their eyes. She caught whispers of another healer and won't last the night, following in their wake. They descended stone steps that grew colder with each level, until Thalera's breath misted in the air. Finally, Ravik stopped before an iron door marked with symbols that made her skin crawl. The purification chamber, he announced, producing an ornate key. Every healer must be cleansed before approaching the king. Strip. Thalera stared at him. Here? Now? The curse spreads through contamination. Everything you carry from the outside world must be destroyed. His violet eyes held no sympathy. Your modesty is irrelevant compared to the king's survival. 2 female servants appeared. elderly twins with matching scars across their throats. They held brass bowls filled with steaming liquid that smelled of bitter herbs and something metallic. Without ceremony, they began pulling at Thalera's clothes, their fingers efficient but not gentle. She stood naked in the freezing chamber, arms wrapped around herself as they poured the burning liquid over her skin. It felt like being flayed with tiny knives. The silver marks on her arms flared to life, glowing so brightly that one servant stumbled backward with a gasp. "Fascinating," Ravik murmured, making another note. "The cleansing solution contains wolfsbane. It should burn any wolf blood, even an Omega's. Yet your marks seem to absorb it." The servants scrubbed her raw with brushes that left her skin red and stinging, then doused her with water so cold she couldn't breathe. They cut her hair to shoulder length, burning the shorn locks in a bronze brazier. Every inch of her was examined, prodded, catalogued. When they finally allowed her to dress, it was in a simple white shift that barely reached her knees. No shoes, no undergarments, nothing that might carry outside influence. "Follow me," Ravik commanded, leading her deeper into the palace's bowels. They passed through a series of increasingly disturbing spaces. A room filled with failed healing implements, crystals cracked and blackened, herbs turned to ash, holy symbols twisted into profane shapes. Another chamber held portraits of previous healers, their faces painted with expressions of terror, dates of death inscribed below each frame. "Your predecessors," Ravik explained unnecessarily. "We keep them as a reminder of the curse's power." The hallway opened into an antechamber where a woman waited, beautiful in a sharp way, with silver hair despite her apparent youth and eyes like chips of ice. She wore the robes of a master physician, decorated with symbols of rank that Thalera didn't recognize. "Physician Thalera," Ravik introduced. "She's been overseeing the king's care since the curse took hold." Thalera circled Thalera with clinical precision. "An Omega. How desperate we've become. Tell me, girl, do you even understand what you're about to face?" "A curse," Thalera replied, meeting the physician's cold gaze steadily. "Not just any curse." Thalera moved to a massive door of pure silver, inscribed with protective runes that hummed with power. "This is a soul claim cast by someone he trusted, someone with the power to reach past his alpha defenses and grip his very essence." "Who?" "If we knew that, we'd have hunted them down already." Thalera placed her hand on the door, and the runes flickered. "The curse is feeding on him, draining his life force to fuel itself. Every time we try to break it, it digs deeper. Traditional healing accelerates it. Divine magic makes it spread. We've tried everything." "Except an Omega's touch," Thalera said quietly. Thalera laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What makes you think your weak blood could succeed where alpha healers have failed?" "Because I'm already broken," Thalera answered honestly. "The curse can't corrupt what's already considered corrupted." Something shifted in Thalera's expression, perhaps a grudging respect. She gestured to the guards, who moved in perfect synchronization, each grasping a handle and pulling. The door opened silently despite its obvious weight, revealing darkness so complete it seemed solid. The smell hit her first, not decay, but something worse. The absence of life, as if the very air had been drained of vitality. Then came the cold, different from the natural chill of the lower levels. This was the cold of void, of spaces between stars. "The king awaits," Ravik said, gesturing her forward. "We'll seal the door behind you. If you succeed, knock 3 times. If you fail, well, we'll know." Thalera stepped into the darkness, and the door closed with a sound like a tomb sealing. For a moment she stood in absolute blackness, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might escape her chest. Then, gradually, her eyes adjusted, or perhaps the darkness itself shifted to allow her vision. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Black silk hung from invisible supports, creating a maze of curtains that moved without wind. At the center, barely visible, stood a bed that seemed carved from a single piece of obsidian. And on that bed lay Alpha King Tharion. Even dying, even cursed, he was magnificent in the way a storm is magnificent, terrible and beautiful, and utterly beyond human scale. His hair, black as the space between thoughts, spread across pillows like spilled ink. His skin, normally the warm bronze of his southern heritage, had paled to alabaster, making the dark veins spreading from his chest look like cracks in marble. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were open, staring at nothing, and they were completely black, not just the iris, but the entire eye, as if they'd been filled with liquid night. She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. This close, she could feel the curse like a living thing, coiled around the king's soul like a parasitic vine. Her marks began to pulse, responding to something in the darkness that surrounded him. The dark veins originated from a wound over his heart. Not a cut, but what looked like a handprint burned into his flesh. The curse caster had touched him there, branded their essence into his very being. "So, you're the sacrifice they've sent this time," she whispered to the unconscious king. "And I'm the one fool enough to try." She extended her hand slowly, watching her marks brighten in response to the curse's presence. The silver patterns on her arms shifted, rearranging themselves into new configurations she'd never seen before. The moment her fingers hovered over the king's chest, the curse struck. Pain exploded through her arm like lightning made of ice, racing up from her fingertips before she'd even made contact. She jerked back, gasping, as her marks flared so bright the entire chamber was momentarily illuminated. But something strange was happening. The pain was already fading, replaced by a tingling warmth. Her marks, which had blazed silver white, were now pulsing with a softer, almost golden light. And the curse, she could feel it recoiling, pulling back from where she'd almost touched it. "You're afraid," she breathed in wonder. "You're afraid of me." The king's body convulsed suddenly. His back arched off the bed, muscles straining against invisible bonds. A sound escaped him, not quite a scream, more like the howl of wind through a dead forest. The black veins across his chest writhed like living things, spreading further up his neck. But Thalera didn't retreat. Instead, she pulled out Esmea's vial, the silvery liquid inside now glowing with the same golden light as her marks. The old healer's words echoed in her mind. The old magic recognizes its own. She drank half the vial in one swallow. It burned like frozen fire down her throat, spreading through her chest until her entire body felt like it was vibrating at a frequency just outside normal perception. The room around her shifted, colors becoming more vivid, shadows gaining depth and texture. She could see the curse now, really see it. It wasn't just darkness, but a complex web of power, beautiful in its terrible intricacy. And at its heart, barely visible, was an image, a woman with violet eyes and midnight hair, her hand pressed to the king's chest in a mirror of the burn mark. "Someone you loved," Thalera murmured. "She used that love to destroy you." Without further hesitation, she placed her hand directly over the handprint burned into the king's chest. The world exploded into sensation, pain, power, and something else entirely. She felt the curse trying to invade her, to corrupt her, as it had corrupted him. But her marks, those strange silver patterns everyone had called death-touched, were doing something unprecedented. They were absorbing the curse, processing it, transforming it into something new. The pain was beyond description, every nerve ending firing at once, every cell screaming in protest. Thalera felt her consciousness fragment like shattered glass, then reform, then shatter again. She was dimly aware of her own voice, raw and desperate, mixing with another sound, the king's awakening roar. She was falling through darkness, through memory that wasn't her own. A younger Therion, laughing as he sparred with his brothers in the training grounds. The sun on his face, the simple joy of strength and speed and pack. The same Therion, older now, standing at his father's deathbed, taking the crown that seemed too heavy for any one man to bear. The isolation that came with absolute power. A woman with violet eyes, beautiful, dangerous, familiar. "I can ease your loneliness," she promised. "I can be what you need." Her lips on his, sweet like poison berries. The betrayal, finding her with ancient texts, forbidden magic. "You were only ever a means to an end," she said as she pressed her hand to his chest, as she burned her claim into his soul. "Your power will feed my ascension." Thalera gasped, jerking back to partial awareness. She was still touching him, her hand fused to his chest by forces she didn't understand. The curse was fighting her, trying to tear her essence apart and scatter it to the winds. But her marks, those strange silver veins everyone had called death-touched, were doing something extraordinary. They were not just absorbing the curse, but metabolizing it, breaking it down into component parts and rebuilding it as something else entirely. The door burst open, flooding the chamber with light. Caltheris stood there, her composed facade cracked with shock. "Impossible!" she breathed, moving closer despite the obvious danger. "You're channeling it. How?" "Stay back!" Thalera warned through gritted teeth. Golden light was spreading from her hand across the king's chest, meeting the darkness in a violent collision of opposing forces. The king's eyes suddenly focused, not the black voids of before, but swirling pools of gold and shadow, aware and present, and fixed on her with an intensity that should have sent any Omega cowering. "Who?" he gasped, his voice rough from disuse. "Who dares?" "Someone trying to save your ungrateful life," she gritted out, pouring more power into the connection. "Now, be quiet and let me work." An Alpha King being told to be quiet by an Omega should have been impossible. The dominance hierarchy should have crushed her for even attempting it, but something in her touch held weight that transcended normal pack dynamics. The curse made one last desperate attempt to maintain its hold. It surged through the connection between them, showing her visions of what she could become if she accepted its power. Ruler of all packs, destroyer of the hierarchy, a goddess of death and rebirth. "You're nothing," the curse whispered with the woman's voice. "A discarded Omega, unwanted, unloved. Take this power. Take what they denied you. For a moment, Thalera wavered. The temptation was real, to become something feared rather than pitied, powerful rather than discarded. But then she felt something else through the connection. The king's true essence, trapped beneath layers of corruption, reaching for her with desperate hope. Not the Alpha King, but Tharion. Just a man poisoned by someone he'd trusted, dying alone in the dark. I don't want power, she said, both to the curse and to him. I just want to heal. She pulled harder, dragging the curse into herself with violent determination. Her marks spread from her arms across her entire body, neck, chest, legs, even her face, creating an intricate network of golden lines that made her look like she'd been shattered and reformed with light as mortar. The curse tried to corrupt her, to turn her into what it needed. But it couldn't corrupt what was already considered corrupted. It couldn't break what was already broken. It couldn't claim what had already claimed itself long ago, in a garden where a 7-year-old girl had chosen to heal despite the cost. With a final, agonized shriek that shattered every piece of glass in the chamber, the curse tore free from the king's soul and plunged entirely into Thalera. She collapsed, her hand finally releasing from his chest. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the king's face, not beautiful anymore, but raw, real, and staring at her with something that looked impossibly like recognition. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like surfacing from deep water. She was no longer in the curse chamber, but somewhere warm, soft. Silk sheets, she realized. A bed that smelled of lavender and something masculine. Cedar, perhaps. You're awake. She turned her head, wincing at the movement. King Tharion sat in a chair beside the bed, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. He was healed, completely, impossibly healed. Gone were the black veins, the cursed wound, the deathly pallor. He looked like a god of war given flesh, all dangerous grace and barely contained power. His eyes, now a warm amber with flecks of gold, watched her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every breath. How long? She managed, her voice barely a whisper. 3 days. He leaned forward, and she noticed the careful distance he maintained. You spoke during it. Fragments, memories. The curse showed you things, didn't it? My memories. Heat flooded her cheeks. She had seen his memories, intimate ones, private ones. His loneliness, his betrayal, his desperate need for connection that the violet-eyed woman had exploited. I didn't mean to... I know. His expression softened slightly. Just as I didn't mean to see yours, she stiffened. Mine? The connection works both ways, he explained. While you were unconscious, while our souls were essentially merged, I saw everything. Your childhood, your family's fear and disgust, the way they sold you to save themselves. Humiliation burned through her. He'd seen her at her most pathetic, the unwanted Omega who couldn't even earn her family's love. Don't, he said sharply, and she realized he could still feel echoes of her emotions. What you endured would have broken most alphas. That you survived with your compassion intact, that you chose to heal despite everything. That's not weakness. That's strength most warriors never achieve. A knock interrupted whatever she might have said. Caltheris entered, carrying a medical bag and wearing an expression of professional curiosity mixed with something else. Wariness? Your Majesty, she said with a precise bow. Forgive the interruption, but I need to examine our patient. Healer, Tharion corrected firmly. She's a healer who succeeded where all others failed. Of course. Caltheris approached the bed slowly. May I? She asked Thalera directly, which surprised them both. Thalera nodded, and the physician began her examination with various crystals and instruments, careful not to actually touch her. Remarkable, Caltheris murmured. The curse hasn't just been contained, it's been completely transformed. Your marks have converted its destructive energy into something else entirely. I've never seen anything like it. What am I now? Thalera asked, looking at her transformed arms. The marks were different. Where once they'd been silver, now they were gold and black, intertwining in patterns that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Something new, Caltheris replied. Your healing abilities have increased exponentially, but more than that, you're carrying a fragment of the king's essence within you. The curse created a permanent link between you. What does that mean? Tharion asked, his voice carefully controlled. It means, Caltheris said slowly, that if she leaves, if the connection is severed, the curse will return, stronger than before. She's not just its container, she's its guardian. The two of you are bound. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Thalera felt the weight of that pronouncement settle into her bones. She'd saved the king, yes, but in doing so had chained herself to him permanently. My family, she began, has already been informed of your success, Tharion said. They've been rewarded as promised. Lands, titles, gold. They've relocated to the southern territories. Far from her, the message was clear. They'd gotten what they wanted and had no interest in the daughter who'd earned it for them. I see, she said quietly. You're not a prisoner, Tharion said suddenly. You'll have rooms in the royal wing, servants, anything you need. You saved my life. The least I can offer is comfort. Rooms in the royal wing? Caltheris's eyebrows rose. Your Majesty, the court will accept my decisions. He cut her off. Anyone who questions the placement of the woman who saved their king can challenge me directly. There was something dangerous in his smile, a reminder that beneath the refined exterior was a predator who'd claimed his throne through blood and strength. The royal wing was a different world entirely. Where the rest of the palace was crystal and cold stone, here warmth radiated from amber-colored walls decorated with tapestries depicting the history of the Valdris line. Thalera's rooms, and they were rooms, plural, which still amazed her, were more luxurious than anything she'd ever imagined. A sitting room with velvet couches and shelves already stocked with books. A bedroom with a bed large enough for 4 people, draped in silks the color of moonlight. A private bathing chamber with a tub carved from rose quartz. And most surprising of all, a workshop filled with healing supplies, herbs, crystals, and texts she'd only dreamed of accessing. This is excessive, she said for the 3rd time, standing in the center of the workshop, afraid to touch anything. It's necessary, Tharion replied from the doorway. He'd been watching her explore each room, seeming to take pleasure in her wonder. You're not just a healer anymore. You're the keeper of my curse. That position requires resources. She turned to face him, still struggling to reconcile the dying man she'd touched 3 days ago with the vital, overwhelming presence before her now. The connection between them hummed quietly, like a string perpetually vibrating just below her consciousness. What happens now? She asked. You're healed, but this. She gestured at her transformed marks. What's my purpose here? To live, he said simply. To learn what you've become. And to help me understand why someone I trusted tried to kill me. Before she could respond, a bell chimed through the palace. Tharyon's expression hardened. Court, he said with obvious distaste. I have to attend. The nobles need to see their king recovered, or rumors will spread. He paused at the door. Will you be all right alone? The thought of being left in these overwhelming rooms made her anxious, but she nodded. I'm used to solitude. Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, but not directed at her. Not anymore, he said firmly. I'll send someone to keep you company. And Thalera, don't leave the royal wing yet. Not until we understand how the court will react to your presence. After he left, Thalera explored the workshop more thoroughly. The books were ancient, some in languages she didn't recognize. The herbs were rare, some she'd only heard about in legends. Everything here was worth more than her family's entire village. She was examining a crystal that pulsed with inner light when she heard footsteps. Not Thalera's. She'd already memorized his gait through their connection. These were lighter, quicker. A young woman appeared in the doorway, perhaps 16 or 17, with auburn hair and bright green eyes that marked her as a fox shifter. She wore servant's clothes, but carried herself with more confidence than any servant Thalera had known. Hello, the girl said brightly. I'm Liralee. His Majesty asked me to attend you, though honestly, I volunteered. Everyone's dying to know about the Omega who saved the king. Thalera tensed. Everyone? Oh yes, the whole palace is buzzing. Some say you're a witch. Others think you're blessed by the moon goddess herself. The really creative ones think you're secretly an alpha in disguise. Liralee grinned. Personally, I think you're just incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, possibly both. Despite herself, Thalera smiled. Definitely both. Excellent. Brave and foolish people are always the most interesting. Liralee moved into the room with easy familiarity. So, what should I call you? My lady? Healer Thalera? Savior of the realm? Just Thalera is fine. Oh, good. The titles were getting exhausting. Liralee perched on a stool. Is it true your marks glow? Can I see? Thalera hesitated, then pushed up her sleeve. The gold and black marks spiraled up her arm like living tattoos. As she watched, they pulsed gently, responding to her attention. Beautiful, Liralee breathed. They look like the old scripts, the ones from before the pacts were formed. My grandmother would love to see these. She's the palace archivist, knows everything about everything, or at least pretends to. Before Thalera could respond, a commotion arose from somewhere below. Shouting, then the sound of something breaking. Liralee jumped to her feet. That's coming from the throne room, she said. Something's wrong. Thalera felt it. Tharyon's sudden rage burning through their connection. Someone had challenged something he considered his. Without thinking, she moved toward the door. You can't go to court, Liralee called after her. Omegas aren't allowed. But Thalera was already running, drawn by the pull of their connection. She found a balcony overlooking the throne room and pressed herself against the railing. Below, the throne room was packed with nobles in their finest clothes. At the center, Thalera stood before his throne, every line of his body radiating controlled violence. Facing him was another alpha, older, with silver threading through his dark beard. An insult to every alpha in the realm, the older man was saying. An omega in the royal wing? Have you lost your mind, along with your curse? Careful, Lord Aldrich. Thalera's voice was deadly quiet. You're speaking about the woman who saved my life. A convenient story, Aldrich sneered. More likely she's bewitched you. No Omega has that kind of power. She's an abomination, and keeping her here... He didn't finish. Thalera moved so fast that Thalera barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next, Aldrich was on the ground with Thalera's hand around his throat. Say one more word about her. Thalera growled. Give me a reason. The throne room held its breath. Then Caltheris stepped forward. Perhaps Lord Aldrich speaks from ignorance, she said smoothly. He hasn't seen what the Omega accomplished. Thalera released Aldrich and stood. His eyes found Thalera on the balcony, and through their connection, she felt his request. Come down. Show them what you are. She shouldn't. Every instinct bred into Omega screamed at her to run. But she was tired of hiding, tired of being dismissed as worthless. She made her way to the throne room, entering through a side door. The moment she appeared, the room erupted in whispers. Her marks were fully visible now, glowing with that strange gold-black light. Impossible! Someone breathed. What are you? Aldrich demanded, scrambling to his feet. I am Thalera, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. Omega, healer, and keeper of the king's curse. She raised her marked arms. I took His Majesty's curse into myself because I could survive what alpha healers could not. Not because I'm powerful, but because I've been surviving being poisoned from within my entire life. She moved closer to where Thalera stood. Lord Aldrich is right. I am an abomination. I'm something that shouldn't exist, but I do exist, and as long as I do, the king lives free of his curse. Prove it, Aldrich demanded. Thalera looked at Thalera, seeking permission. He nodded once. She reached out and touched his hand. The moment their skin made contact, the throne room exploded with light. Their connection became visible, threads of gold and shadow weaving through the air. Everyone could see it, the curse contained within her marks, held in check by her will alone. She released his hand, and the light faded. Several nobles had fallen to their knees. Does anyone else question my decision? Thalera asked. Silence answered him. Good. Court is dismissed. As the nobles scattered, Thalera turned to her. You shouldn't have come. You needed me, she replied simply. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, recognition, something deeper she couldn't name. He took her arm gently, and she felt warmth pulse through their connection. Not the curse, but something entirely different. Something that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. The days following the throne room confrontation settled into an unexpected rhythm. Thalera spent her mornings in the workshop, studying the ancient texts and experimenting with her transformed abilities. Her marks had stabilized into intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story she couldn't quite read yet. Lyrelei had become a constant companion, her cheerful chatter filling the silence Thalera had lived with for so long. You're getting famous, Lyrelei announced one afternoon, carrying a tray of letters. Marriage proposals from minor lords, requests for healing, 3 death threats, though those are poorly spelled, and an invitation to tea from Duchess Moravia. Thalera looked up from the herb mixture she was preparing. Death threats? Oh, those are normal. Anyone who gets close to the king receives them. I'll have them investigated, of course. Lyra Lee sorted through the papers with practiced efficiency. The marriage proposals are more interesting. Lord Garrett offers 300 acres and 40 horses for your hand. I'm not cattle to be bought, Thalera said sharply. No, but you're an unmated Omega with unprecedented power. That makes you the most eligible woman in the kingdom, whether you like it or not. Through her connection with Tharion, she felt a spike of irritation. He was in a council meeting, but somehow aware of her distress. The sensation was becoming familiar. This constant awareness of each other, like sharing a heartbeat across distance. That evening, Caltheris arrived for what had become a daily examination. The physician's initial coldness had gradually thawed into professional curiosity, though she maintained careful boundaries. Your marks are evolving, she noted, studying the patterns through a magnifying crystal. They're becoming more complex, almost like they're writing themselves into existence. What do you mean? Caltheris pulled out a journal filled with sketches. I've been documenting the changes. Look, this was 3 days ago. She showed a drawing of Thalera's arm. And this is today. See how the patterns have shifted? They're telling a story, perhaps even prophecy. About what? I'm not certain yet, but I've sent word to the archive. There are scholars who specialize in the old languages. They might be able to translate. She paused, then added more gently, How are you feeling? Any pain? No pain, just awareness. I can feel the curse still, contained but active, like holding a wild animal that's chosen not to bite. And your connection to the king? Thalera hesitated. The connection had grown stronger each day, evolving from simple awareness to something more complex. She could feel his emotions, yes, but also glimpses of his thoughts, his memories. Sometimes she woke with the taste of his dreams on her tongue. It's deepening, she admitted. Caltheris made a note. That's to be expected. The curse created a soul bond, however unintentionally. Such bonds typically strengthen over time until... She trailed off. Until what? Until the bonded pair either accepts it fully or it tears them apart. The physician's expression was unusually sympathetic. There's no middle ground with soul bonds. They demand complete surrender or complete severance. That night, unable to sleep, Thalera wandered the royal wing. She found herself in a gallery she hadn't explored before, lined with portraits of previous queens. All alphas or high-ranking betas, all radiating power and authority. She looked nothing like them. You don't have to be like them. She turned to find Tharion behind her, dressed casually in simple clothes rather than his usual royal attire. He looked younger this way, less like a king and more like just a man. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. I felt your restlessness. He moved to stand beside her, studying the portraits. My mother's portrait should be here, but my father had it removed. Couldn't bear the shame of an Omega queen, even after her death. You mentioned she was Omega. How did they meet? She was a healer, actually. Came to treat my father's war wounds. He fell in love with her despite every law saying he shouldn't. Kept her hidden for years. Pretended she was beta when she became pregnant. His jaw tightened. The stress of maintaining that lie killed her. She died when I was 7. I'm sorry. She would have liked you, he said softly. Someone who refuses to let others define their worth. They stood in comfortable silence until Thalera asked, what was her gift? All Omegas have one, even if it's small. She could see the truth in people. One touch, and she knew their real nature, their deepest secrets. It's why my father both loved and feared her. He turned to face her. What's yours? Beyond the healing? I don't know anymore. The marks changed everything. I feel like I'm becoming something new, every day. Show me. She held out her hand, palm up. After a moment's hesitation, he placed his hand over hers. The connection flared to life, but this time she controlled it, channeling it into something visible. Golden threads of light wound around their joined hands, and for a moment she saw what he saw. Herself, glowing with power that had nothing to do with the curse and everything to do with her own evolution. Beautiful, he breathed, and through their connection, she felt he meant more than just the light show. 3 weeks passed before the first real test came. Thalera was in the palace's lower hospital, working alongside the regular healers. Despite Caltheris's initial protests, she'd insisted on using her abilities to help others. The common people, unlike the nobles, didn't care that she was Omega. They cared that she could heal injuries that had resisted all other treatment. She was treating a young boy's infected wound when she felt it, a disturbance in her connection with Therion. Not pain, but something wrong. Darkness creeping at the edges. Stay here, she told the boy's mother, then ran. She found him in his study, collapsed over his desk. Black veins were spreading from his chest, not as severe as before, but unmistakably the curse reasserting itself. No, she breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. This isn't possible. His eyes opened, and they held flecks of that terrible darkness. It's fighting back, he gasped. The curse, it's trying to return. Caltheris burst through the door, having been summoned by the guards. She took one look and paled. The bond is weakening. The curse senses it. That's impossible. I haven't done anything to weaken. You've been distancing yourself emotionally. Caltheris interrupted. I've observed it. You maintain physical proximity, but emotional barriers. The curse exploits any weakness in the bond. Thalera placed her hands on Therion's chest, pouring her power into him. The marks on her skin blazed, and slowly, painfully, the black veins retreated. But she could feel the effort it took, much more than it should have. This is temporary, Caltheris said bluntly. The curse will keep trying to return unless the bond is stabilized. How? Therion asked, his voice rough. You know how. The physician's expression was grave. Soul bonds require complete acceptance. No barriers, no hesitation. You're both holding back, and it's killing the connection. That night, Therion came to Thalera's rooms. She was on her balcony, watching the stars, when she felt him approach. We need to talk, he said. I know. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. I've been keeping my distance, trying to give you space, not wanting to pressure you. But today proved that's not possible. The bond demands more. It demands everything. He turned to face her. Thalera, I need to know, is this just obligation for you? The bond, staying here, helping me? Because if it is, we need to find another solution. She was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with truths she'd been avoiding. At first, yes, it was obligation. I was sold to save you, bound by a curse neither of us chose. But now I wake up reaching for your thoughts, I feel incomplete when you're too far away. When you hurt today, it felt like my own heart was being torn out. She met his eyes. I've been keeping walls up because I'm terrified. Not of you, but of wanting something I've never been allowed to have. What? To be chosen, not because I'm useful or because there's no other option, but because someone actually wants me. Therion moved closer, his hands gently cupping her face. Then let me be clear. I don't want you because of the bond. I don't need you just because of the curse. I choose you because when you walked into that darkness to save a stranger, you showed more courage than any warrior I've known. Because you see me as Therion, not just the Alpha King. Because your presence makes every room brighter, every burden lighter. Therion, I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Not the bond, not gratitude. Love. Real, complicated, terrifying love. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Through their connection, she felt the truth of his words, the vulnerability it took for him to say them. I think I'm falling too, she whispered. When he kissed her, gentle and questioning, her marks responded with warm golden light. The bond between them strengthened, solidified, became something unbreakable. The change was immediate and undeniable. Within days of their emotional breakthrough, Thalera's marks had evolved again, now incorporating threads of pure silver among the gold and black. More surprisingly, Tharion had developed marks of his own, faint golden lines along his arms that matched hers. This is unprecedented, Thalera said during their joint examination. She'd been documenting everything with increasing excitement. The bond is creating reciprocal changes. You're not just connected, you're synchronizing. Is it dangerous? Therion asked. Unknown, but your vitals are stronger than ever, both of you. She paused, then added carefully, there's something else. The reproductive barriers between Alpha and Omega. In your case, they seem to be dissolving. Thalera's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean, the biological impossibilities are becoming possible. The bond is rewriting your fundamental nature. Thalera set down her instruments. I've been corresponding with scholars from the ancient archives. There are legends of this, pairs so perfectly matched that they transcend normal limitations. Synthesis pairs, Lyralay's grandmother said from the doorway. The elderly archivist entered, carrying scrolls that looked older than the palace itself. I've found references, pairs who could bridge the gap between Alpha and Omega, creating something entirely new. She spread the scrolls on the table, revealing illustrations of pairs with intertwined marks, children who bore traits of both hierarchies, kingdoms transformed by their union. These are myths, Tharion said, though his voice held wonder. Myths born from truth, the archivist corrected. Every 1,000 years or so, a pair emerges who can change the fundamental nature of our kind. The last ones founded the Southern Alliance, where alphas and omegas live as equals. What happened to them? Thalera asked. They lived long, happy lives and had 7 children, each one different, each one proof that the hierarchy isn't fixed. The old woman smiled. But they also faced resistance. Change terrifies those in power. As if summoned by her words, a guard burst in. Your Majesty, urgent news. 3 Alpha Lords from the Northern Territories have arrived. They're demanding an audience about the Omega situation. Tharion's expression hardened. They can wait until... They've brought an army, the guard interrupted. 500 warriors. They say they're here to liberate you from unnatural influence. The throne room was tense when they entered. 3 Alpha Lords stood in formation. Lord Aldrich had returned, accompanied by Lords Garrett and Thorn. Behind them, visible through the great windows, their army waited in the courtyard. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said with a mocking bow, "we've come to offer you freedom from this cursed bond." "I'm quite free already," Tharion replied coldly. "Are you? An Omega has marked you." Garrett gestured at the faint golden lines visible on Tharion's arms. "She's changing you, weakening your alpha nature. This is magical corruption of the highest order. What we have is recognized by ancient law," Tharion said. "Even you can't challenge a true soul bond." "We can, if we prove it's corrupted," Thorn spoke for the first time. He was the oldest of them, scarred from countless battles. "A formal challenge has been issued, trial by combat. If you win, we acknowledge the bond. If you lose..." "If he loses, I become property of the victor," Thalera finished. She'd studied enough law to know how this worked. "Exactly," Aldrich smiled cruelly. "And since you've been weakened by her influence, Your Majesty, we've graciously agreed to make it sporting. You may choose a champion to fight in your place." It was a trap. If Tharion fought himself, they'd claim any victory was due to Thalera's corruption weakening him. If he chose a champion who lost, she'd be forfeit. "I'll fight," Tharion said. "No." Thalera stepped forward. "I invoke the right of response." The room went silent. Caltheris whispered urgently, "That law hasn't been used in 3 centuries. An Omega can't. An Omega who has been formally claimed can fight for their own freedom." The archivist spoke up, her voice carrying surprising authority. "It's old law, but still valid." "This is absurd," Garrett laughed. "An Omega against an Alpha in combat?" "Not just any Omega," Thalera said, her marks beginning to glow. "One who carries the power of a transformed curse. Unless you're afraid?" The insult landed perfectly. Garrett's face flushed with rage. "I accept. Tomorrow at dawn. To submission or death." After the lords left, Tharion grabbed Thalera's shoulders. "You can't do this. Garrett is a veteran warrior. He's killed dozens in formal challenges. And I've survived being poisoned from within since childhood. I've absorbed a curse that killed alpha healers. I think I can handle one prejudiced lord." "This isn't a game." "No, it's not." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling their bond pulse with warmth. "It's about proving that Omegas aren't property, that we can defend ourselves, choose our own fate. This is bigger than just us." He pulled her close, and she felt his fear through their connection. "If you die, then you'll be free of the bond, and the curse will return. But I won't die." She looked up at him with fierce determination. "I've survived too much to fall now." Dawn came too quickly. The combat circle had been drawn in the main courtyard, ancient runes marking its boundaries. What seemed like the entire palace had gathered to watch, nobles and servants alike forming a living wall around the circle. The 3 challenging lords stood together, confident in their victory. Lord Garrett was already in the circle, stripped to the waist, his scarred torso testament to his experience. Thalera entered from the opposite side, wearing simple fighting clothes that Lirali had found for her. Her marks were hidden beneath long sleeves, though their glow was faintly visible through the fabric. An omega in the combat circle. Someone whispered. Blasphemy. The king must be truly bewitched to allow this. Another replied. Tharion stood at the circle's edge, his tension visible in every line of his body. Through their bond, she felt his desperate desire to intervene, held back only by his respect for her choice. Trust me, she sent through their connection. Always, came his response, though worry colored it. The rules are simple, Lord Thorn announced. Combat continues until submission or death. Shifting is permitted. No weapons, no interference. He looked directly at Tharion. From anyone. Garrett grinned, already savoring victory. Ready to return to your proper place, Omega? On your knees? The only one kneeling today will be you, Thalera replied calmly. The bell rang. Garrett moved faster than she expected, crossing the circle in 2 strides. His fist connected with her ribs before she could dodge, sending her rolling across the stone. The crowd gasped, some in sympathy, others in satisfaction. Pathetic, Garrett laughed. This will be over in... Thalera rose, and her sleeves had torn from the impact. Her marks blazed visible, gold and black and silver, intertwining in patterns that seemed to move. Where he'd struck her, the marks had absorbed the impact, converting kinetic energy into power. Interesting, she said, spitting blood. Hit me again. Confused but eager, Garrett obliged. This time, she didn't try to dodge. His fist connected with her stomach, and she felt the curse within her respond, drinking in the violence, transforming it. The marks spread, covering more of her visible skin. What are you? Garrett stepped back, uncertainty creeping into his expression. Something new? She replied. Then she moved. The absorbed energy released in a burst of speed that shouldn't have been possible for an Omega. She struck him once, twice, 3 times before he could react. Not with trained technique, but with raw power channeled through her marks. Garrett stumbled back, nose bleeding. With a snarl, he shifted. His wolf was massive, gray and scarred, teeth bared in rage. The crowd pressed back. A shifted alpha in combat was lethal. Thalera couldn't shift. She'd never had a wolf. But as Garrett's wolf lunged, she did something else entirely. She caught him. Her hands gripped his throat, marks blazing so bright that people shielded their eyes. The curse's power, fed by months of containing it, surged through her arms. Not to harm, but to dominate. Submit, she commanded, and her voice carried harmonics that bypassed normal hierarchy. The wolf fought, clawing at her arms, drawing blood that glowed gold as it fell. But she held on, pouring power through the contact. She showed him what she truly was, not just an Omega, but a bridge between life and death, healing and harm, creation and destruction. Garrett's wolf form shuddered. Then, impossibly, it submitted. An alpha wolf bowing to an Omega should have broken natural law. Yet there he was, belly to the ground, whimpering. Yield, Thalera said, releasing him. Garrett shifted back, gasping. I yield! The courtyard erupted. Some shouted about impossibility, others about dark magic, but the combat had been clean, witnessed by hundreds. The challenge is settled, Thorn said reluctantly. The bond stands. Aldrich stepped forward, face twisted with rage. This proves nothing except that she's even more dangerous than we thought. She must be... Must be what? Tharian's voice cut through the noise. He entered the circle, moving to stand beside Thalera. Destroyed? Imprisoned? For the crime of being stronger than you expected? She's an aberration. She's the future. Tharian took Thalera's hand, their joined marks glowing in harmony. The world is changing, lords. The rigid hierarchies that have defined us for millennia are crumbling. We can evolve or become extinct. He turned to address the entire crowd. Let it be known throughout the kingdom, Thalera is not just my bonded, but my equal, my partner, my mate in every sense that matters. Any who challenge her, challenge the throne itself. You cannot mate an Omega! Garrett protested, struggling to his feet. I can, and I will, Tharian replied. Unless anyone else wishes to challenge either of us? Silence answered him. As the crowd dispersed, Tharian pulled Thalera aside, examining her injuries with gentle hands. You're hurt? I'm healing, she corrected, watching the cuts close under the influence of her marks. The curse's power. I'm learning to channel it. You were magnificent, he said softly. Terrifying, but magnificent. I had good motivation. She leaned into him, suddenly exhausted. I couldn't let them take me from you. Never, he agreed, pressing his lips to her forehead. We're bound, remember? In soul, and now, in choice. Caltheris approached them, and for the first time since Thalera had met her, the physician was smiling. That display will have consequences. Word will spread, an Omega who defeated an Alpha in formal combat. Good, Thalera said. Let them know we're not helpless. You're not just not helpless, Caltheris corrected, her respect now evident. You're revolutionary. I've been studying the ancient texts the archivist found. What you two are becoming, it could change everything. That evening, in the privacy of Tharian's chambers, they sat before the fireplace. Thalera was curled against his side, their marks glowing softly in the firelight. Your mother would be proud, she said quietly. She would have loved you, he agreed, an Omega who refuses to be diminished. A king who sees beyond hierarchy. A perfect match. He tilted her chin up, and his kiss was gentle, reverent. Marry me. She pulled back, startled. What? Not a political arrangement or a bond forced by curse. A real marriage, a choice. His eyes searched hers. I love you, Thalera. Not because of what you can do or what you represent, but because of who you are, your courage, your compassion, your strength. Marry me. Through their bond, she felt the depth of his sincerity, the hope and fear and love all tangled together. Yes, she whispered, then louder, laughing. Yes! Their marks blazed with joy, and for a moment, the room filled with light that had nothing to do with fire and everything to do with two souls choosing to become one. 1 year later, the throne room had been transformed for the ceremony. Where once only the highest nobles would have stood, now beings of every rank filled the space. Omegas stood beside Alphas, Betas mingled freely, and the rigid formations of old had given way to something more organic, more alive. Thalera stood before the great window, wearing a gown that incorporated her marks into its design, gold and black and silver threads that seemed to capture light itself. Her hands rested on the subtle swell of her stomach, where the impossible had become reality. Nervous? Lyrelai asked, making final adjustments to the crown of silver flowers in Thalera's hair. Terrified, Thalera admitted. Not about the wedding. We've been bonded so long that feels like formality. But this... She touched her stomach again. Caltheris, now a close friend rather than just physician, smiled warmly. The children are healthy. Both of them. Twins. Thalera still marveled at the word. One presenting markers for alpha, one for omega, but both carrying aspects of each. You were right. We're becoming something new. The first of many, the archivist added from her chair. She'd become a permanent fixture in their lives, documenting everything. Across the kingdom, others are manifesting similar changes. The rigid hierarchy is dissolving, replaced by something more fluid. Not everyone's happy about it, Lyrelai pointed out. There are still those who resist. Change is never easy, Thalera agreed, but it's necessary. The music began, not the traditional royal march, but something new composed for this unprecedented union. Thalera made her way through the palace, and everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of transformation. Guards who were Omega and Beta alongside Alpha. Servants who walked with dignity rather than fear. Noble families that included all designations. When she entered the throne room, her breath caught. Tharion stood at the altar, magnificent in royal blue and silver, but his eyes held only warmth, only love. Their bond hummed with contentment, two souls that had found their perfect match. "You're radiant," he said when she reached him, not caring that the entire kingdom could hear. "You're biased," she replied, but smiled. The ceremony itself blended old traditions with new understanding. They exchanged vows that spoke not of dominance and submission, but of partnership and choice. When they kissed, their marks blazed in perfect harmony, and several people swore they saw wings of light spread from their joined forms. Later, at the reception held in the gardens, Thalera found a moment of quiet. She stood among the impossible flowers that had grown from her touch, roses that bloomed in rainbow colors, herbs that carried moonlight in their leaves. "My lady," a young voice said. She turned to find a girl, perhaps 12, with the telltale signs of being Omega, but carrying herself with unusual confidence. "Yes?" "I just wanted to thank you," the girl said. "My parents were going to sell me to pay debts. But after what you did, after proving Omegas could be strong, they changed their minds. They're letting me train as a healer instead." Thalera knelt, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. "You were always strong. I just reminded everyone else to notice." The girl's eyes shone with tears and hope before she scurried away. "Changing lives already?" Tharion's voice came from behind her. "We both are." She leaned back against him, his arms encircling her and their unborn children. "Your mother would be so proud." "She would be proud of you," he corrected. "An Omega who transformed a curse into a gift, who defeated an Alpha in combat, who carries children that will bridge our divided world." "We did it together," she reminded him. "The bond is just the beginning." He turned her to face him. "We have a lifetime to discover what else we can become." As the sun set over the crystal palace, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Thalera reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a rejected Omega sold to save a dying king, to a queen who'd helped reshape their entire world. The curse that had threatened to destroy them had become the catalyst for transformation. The bond forced upon them had become the greatest gift. And the love that shouldn't have been possible had become the foundation for a new age. In the gardens below, she could hear music and laughter. Alphas and omegas dancing together, barriers dissolving, fear replaced by hope. It wouldn't be easy. Change never was. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt. But as Thalera's hand found hers, their marks glowing with that familiar warmth, she knew they would face it all together. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," she replied, and meant it. "Everything that seemed like a curse led me to you. And everything that seemed impossible became reality." Above them, the first stars appeared, blessing the union that had transformed not just two souls, but an entire kingdom's understanding of what was possible when love transcended law, when connection conquered curse, and when the lowest became the most precious of all. In the years that would follow, their story would be told throughout the lands, not as a fairy tale, but as proof that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest curses. Their children would grow up in a world where designation didn't determine destiny, where strength came in many forms, and where an omega could stand as equal to an alpha. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply Thalera and Tharion, two souls who had found each other against all odds, whose love had rewritten the very laws of nature. And that, they knew, was the greatest transformation of all.